Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everybody, I am delighted to introduce you today to my guest, Deborah Midanek. Deborah is a catalyst, helping leaders navigate change with clarity and confidence. A veteran corporate director, turnaround executive, and now author, she is leading a downtown turnaround in her adopted hometown of Grenada, Mississippi. And let's be clear, it's not Grenada, the island. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you, Miss Tammy. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, I'm excited to have you. So, born and raised in New York, spent a good number of your growing up in professional years in New York. So, tell us a little bit about some of those earlier years and some of the transitions that you made. And then, of course, we're all waiting with bated breath to know, how did she end up in Grenada, Mississippi from New York? Because really, it is intriguing, I have to say.
Well, when I was leaving New York, I think I was, letting people know that I was going. And but I heard this rumor that Midanek had gone to Morgan Stanley. And I thought to myself, now, how on earth did that happen? And then I thought, oh, that email. I had used the email saying I was going to MS. And so I wrote back, I sent another email saying, no, it's not Morgan Stanley. And so one person actually wrote back and said, well, Microsoft?
But I can understand why people who knew you in New York and the kind of work you were doing there, why they might misinterpret MS as Morgan Stanley, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
It was charming. It was fun. But, I have always been a bit of a misfit. And just as I think you said when we were speaking before this, the podcast started, it's sort of like that line from King Lear that readiness is all. So at a certain point, I went from thinking that my transitions were really difficult and traumatic to thinking that my transitions were delightful, right? Because regardless, ever since I was born, I've been reinventing myself. I was born to a distressed couple. And my father sort of disappeared very quickly. And my mother had to figure out how to support me. So we moved around a lot. The IRS was chasing her for his tax debts, and she couldn't afford to divorce him. This was the 1950s, in which women were not exactly expected to be independent. So I went to 13 elementary schools, which is an important part of the training for transitions later in life. So it's that base that I have been relying on, from pretty much my whole life. I started college at one place where I was in the first year of co-ed housing. Their class had been oversubscribed, so they put back in service a dormitory that was supposed to have been shut down for demolition and rebuilding because it was in such bad shape. And it was in West Philadelphia, and the gang wars were going on there. The mayor had a curfew, 10:30 at night, and we were told to take our keys with us, not just into the bathroom when we took a shower, but to take them into the shower with us.
As a weapon.
It was war. So I transferred from there to a small suburban women's liberal arts college, I was accepted there to begin with, but I thought that it was just too tame. It was too typecast. So I decided to go to the big urban guerrilla place.
Would you want to tell us what the big urban
guerrilla? Sure, it was the University of Pennsylvania. So I transferred to Bryn Mawr, which was a wonderful respite and period of recovery for me. It suited me to a T. And then I stayed on afterwards to work in the admissions office. And this was a time when colleges and universities did not have administrations, really. They had faculty, they had students, and then they had these guys in the business office, right? They didn't recognize the need for any kind of professional staff.
Right.
But the cool thing about that, which really also helped me much in my later life, was that job had me traveling 200 days a year. The college had no money. It was learning for the first time in 1975. It had to compete. So I was sent all over the country to recruit and talk with 17-year-old young women and their parents and their guidance counselors and the alumni, often all at one time, which was difficult to explain why we needed to go east to this really special women's college that was all about the liberal arts. Now, a great many people in the country did not have any clue as to what I was talking about, which was fascinating. So I went all over the place and I stayed with alumni everywhere I went. So I stayed with some seriously distinguished people. Yeah. And that really set me up well. But the truth is, the only thing I could figure out that I wanted to do at that point was be the president of the college. But I decided that I was not likely to go and get an academic degree, which was very important. I'd have to get my doctorate. Yeah. But I thought, well, gee, this college really doesn't know how to run itself professionally. So let me get an MBA. But it wasn't nearly as straightforward as that. The truth is, I ran out of road in terms of running the admissions office. I changed around the job descriptions. I used the first mag card typewriters to create standardized responses that look like customized letters so that we could shrink the head count that we needed to type everything.
Did you say mag card?
Yeah, do you remember those?
Yes, but I'm wondering how many of our listeners will know what we're talking about.
Probably not, but it was the first sort of electric typewriter that had any kind of memory in it.
Right.
They may not know what a typewriter is. But anyway. But, I sort of ran out of road as far as reorganizing that process and so on. So I was looking for more of a challenge. I heard that the Wharton School was looking for an assistant director of admissions. So I called them and I got myself an interview with the director of admissions. And he said, well, from a personality and experience base, you would be really a perfect fit. But do you have an MBA? And I literally said, no. What's an MBA? And he said, well, okay, have you taken the GMATs? And of course I said, no. What are the GMATs? So he said, okay, have you taken the SATs? And I said, yes. He said, well, what were your scores? No, my scores were very high. So I told him the scores. He said, fine, you're admitted and you've got a job.
That's simple, huh?
That's how I went to the Wharton School. So that was a fascinating transition for me. And I went to find a summer job. And oddly enough, I got hired by Conrail, which was the Consolidated Rail Corporation, which was the entity into which the railroad assets of the once bankrupt Penn Central were transferred out of government hands. The government took it over for 8 or 10 years and tried to rearrange the routes and make them make sense, but they didn't do a very good job. So it was back in private hands. And I was given a really interesting job. I was a liberal arts person. Everybody else that had a summer job was an engineer. And my job was to figure out, given regulatory changes in the railroad merger environment, which railroads were likely to merge and what the impact on Conrail's traffic and revenue would be.
Now, was this a summer job before you went to Wharton?
No, it was my summer job in between my Wharton semesters.
Oh, okay. So I want to make sure I understand your path here. You left your job in admissions at Bryn Mawr. You had contacted admissions at Wharton thinking maybe they would hire you to work in their admissions department and that might also be a pathway to getting into grad school. Is that right?
Well, that's why I contacted them. Yes. I wasn't really looking to go to graduate school. I was just looking for a job.
But
then I sat there, had that conversation with the guy, and he said, well, you're admitted to the MBA class. Like, okay, I guess I'm going to get an MBA.
So you went to Wharton just to get the MBA. You didn't end up working for admissions.
Oh, yes, I did.
So you were going to grad school and working at the same time?
And doing my summer job at Conrail.
Oh, okay.
And there's the Conrail story is actually kind of a fun one because I worked for this guy who had been the vice president of marketing in the New York Central. And he'd been there at the time of the collapse of the railroad in 1970 that had huge repercussions in our economy and in our governance system and so on. And he was such a rabid railroad man that he stuck with it through the period in which it was under public hands. And the fun thing was, I wrote a little paper on a fairly small railroad merger that happened. And in that paper, which I conferred with him over multiple times, because it turned out I really liked this guy. I really respected him. Nobody else did. And I wrote this paper saying that the mergers were not going to be transcontinental. There's this huge romance about we're going to have an end-to-end railroad that crosses the country, because he sent me to all the real railroad guys, the guys that still had the green eye shades and still had the bands around their sleeves.
Yeah.
And they showed me their bills of lading and so on. The whole freight traffic pattern was north-south. So I said, okay, it's going to be a north-south merger. It's not going to be east-west. Then 2 weeks later, so he liked this little paper, and then he took it to the chairman of Conrail. Say, look what this summer intern did. Blah, 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 blah. So that was kind of cool. But 2 weeks later, the first huge north-south merger was announced, the Chessie Seaboard Coastline merger. So nobody at Conrail, other than me and my little guy in the corner office, knew anything about railroad mergers. So suddenly, yours truly had a job for the next 3 years, where my job was to go to the Chessie and the Seaboard Coastline offices, figure out how they did their traffic studies justifying the merger, and then figure out how internally Conrail could analyze the impact on Conrail's traffic and revenue, and then develop the testimony for the chairman of the company in the ICC hearings about whether to approve the merger or not. So it turned out that this stupid little dweeb job, talk about transitions, turned into this ridiculously fun, engaging, and scary assignment, right?
So did you end up leaving your employment at Wharton?
Not exactly. Everybody sort of put me on an hourly thing. I didn't then continue to have like a regular 9-to-5 job at Wharton. What I became was somebody who was reading the applications when it was needed.
I see.
And then I'd mark, so I could do that anytime I wanted. I could do that at midnight if I wanted, and I often did. And then at the end of my first semester, oddly enough, I kept getting hundreds on the marketing tests. And it's like, I've been doing this. I've been marketing this school, and I didn't know it was called marketing, but I know this stuff.
Right.
So I applied for and got a role as a teaching assistant in marketing. But at the end of this period, I had had a tremendous education.
Oh my goodness.
Right?
Yeah.
Just think of all the things that I got to do, and how cool was that?
This is really interesting. I can imagine somebody listening to this and their head might be spinning a little bit, because it's like, wait a minute, she was here, she was there, she was doing what? Did she ever get any sleep? But I think beyond that, it sounds like when opportunities came up, you kind of poured yourself into it and just sort of stayed open and curious to what was in front of you. And you saw a puzzle and you said, okay, let's solve the puzzle.
That's right. I think because of those 13 elementary schools that I had learned that I had a certain kind of resilience. So I learned an enormous amount, but it wasn't exactly learned in the classroom. I learned a lot during that period of time. Mm-hmm. But when I put it all together at the end, and all that crazy interviewing is going on the campus, I'm thinking, okay, well, I still don't know what I want to do. But if I put these things together, I have worked for a college that's going through serious challenges as suddenly its market is radically changed.
Yeah.
And the money that it takes to maintain a campus is really big after all these years of inflation.
Yeah.
So it's having to learn whole new ways to manage itself. I have now worked for a bankrupt railroad, and I've had a wonderful time with that. So I didn't elect to stay in railroads, not because I was extremely feminist oriented, but because I thought the burden of working in a railroad as a woman was just too high, because even the secretaries were men. It's like, I just don't think that I can progress there. And if I do progress the way I want to progress, I have to go out and be a road foreman of engines. I really need to get into the operations.
Yeah.
So that would be difficult to do. So I thought, okay, what else is going through this kind of serious transition that would create an opportunity for somebody like me?
Yeah.
And the world of finance was sort of obviously that. Now, finance at that time, as I understood it, was, banking and investment banking were separate. And I did have an interview at Goldman Sachs because the head of career planning really liked me. And he told me I'd be a perfect fit for Goldman Sachs. And I proceeded in the interview to say, well, yes, but listen, you guys get so busy. How on earth do you get to live an examined life? I was not invited back. So I didn't go to work at Goldman Sachs. But what I did do is go to Bankers Trust Company, which has been gone for quite some time. But it had come through what in the 1970s had been a serious real estate crisis. Many banks had been affected by it. And it had just restructured themselves or announced their intention to restructure themselves to go out of retail banking and focus only on wholesale banking. So I went in there to be on the staff of the chairman. And there were 6 of us, 6 brand new MBAs who had this job to be the staff of the chairman. And we were supposed to figure out what it meant organizationally to design a company that matched what the chairman had declared he was doing, getting rid of the branches. So we managed the sale of the branch system, which hadn't been done at that point. Nobody had ever done that before. But I realized then this orientation to money began to shift because I had picked things based on intellectual interest and passion, because the turnaround is a really passionate thing. And it was a pretty passionate exercise to convert Bankers Trust Company from one business model to another. But it didn't take very long to realize that, wait a minute, I work in a bank. What is a bank about? A bank is about money. So as long as I'm on the planning staff and not in the money-making end of things, I am not exactly relevant. Okay then. So I started writing profiles of the competitive banks that we were looking at and putting them in 2 pages and taking them to the alumni of those banks that I knew worked in Bankers Trust Company. Say, hey, the bank that you left. Would you mind looking at this 2 pages and see if I've captured their strategy well enough and so on? I started being somebody that actually they would have conversations with about what banking was all about. Yeah. And then I became known as somebody who could condense a lot of information into a written product pretty well. So I got myself drafted out of planning and into the banking side, but I had a problem in that I couldn't work in the traditional banking areas because my strategic planning job had me go off on retreats with all the top guys in the bank, and I knew all their dirty laundry, right? I knew them too well. Wow. So I could not be in a direct reporting line up through 6 people up to them. It just wasn't going to work. So I went into the brand new investment banking arm of Bankers Trust Company that was doing private placements of corporate debt. And
before you go on there, I just want to capture something here in terms of you moving from the planning side and how that there were certain places you said you could not go because you knew certain people's, as you said, dirty laundry. Was it that you couldn't go there? Was that kind of an unspoken rule? Or did you yourself know that you'd have to find your way through over to the investment banking side? Or were you kind of shepherded over there? Like, I'm wondering dynamically how that occurred, because you're talking about it in a way that you understood or you understand now in retrospect why certain things happened a certain way. And it's easy to see it now. I don't know if you were able to see it at the time, but I'm just curious because it sounds like you made a few different, I guess you could say strategic transitions, although it may or may not have been completely in your control at that time. Although it does sound like there were several things you did along the way throughout your time at Bankers Trust where you took some initiative to really, because you saw an opportunity and it also allowed you to stand out and make an impact. So did you intentionally make that shift, or were you kind of moved over because people knew you knew too much in certain areas to that assistant vice president role?
It's a good question in the sense that, I don't think I was shepherded, in that I don't think that I've ever been shepherded in my life. But
Okay.
they may have reacted to me the same way I reacted to them, which is that, this woman is a little unpredictable because she kind of makes opportunities out of thin air. Well, we don't want to fire her. We don't want to lose her. But if she really wants to be in a line job, she probably shouldn't be reporting to us because, who the hell is she? She's a little weird. She doesn't actually fit the mold.
You know that they were really thinking those things, or
No, I'm just guessing that might have happened. But I've been a gorilla.
did you get moved over or did you move over?
So I got myself moved over because something bad was done to me.
Okay.
And I was ready to leave the bank. And a guy who really didn't particularly like me, but thought that it was unjust what was happening. He handed me a telephone number. He squeezed it into my hand one time, trying to make it look like he never had spoken to me. And it said, call this woman in personnel. So I called her. And she called me in and she said, okay, what the hell's going on? I told her, and I have never seen anybody do this in my life before, but she got up from her desk and stood up on her chair and was shaking her arms at the ceiling saying, oh, this cannot have happened. So listen, here's the deal. I will get you any job you want in this bank and I'm doubling your salary.
Ooh. Well, we know that this could be a whole nother story. I get it. I guess I asked the question.
It wasn't terrible. Nobody did anything.
No, clearly.
It was not a sexual impropriety. What it was a guy was playing political games with me and using me as bait in improper ways.
Yeah.
And when everybody figured it out, it's like, damn, whoa, he should not have done that.
Yeah.
So she got me an interview with, the top guys that I didn't already know.
Right.
And so I went to the one that was farthest away from all the nests of the inside stories that I knew about.
Yeah.
And so that was the investment banking world. And it was a lovely, lucrative business, which we were solving real problems. But like anything else, it then grew and it grew and it grew and it grew. But I knew how to do it from, the very early days when you had a mandate that came over a telex for 2 months and to get the deal done. And then slowly we started to hedge the deals ourselves and so on. So then I ran into this guy who had been the problem in the first place for me. And at that point, it's like, okay, I can't believe I'm going through this stuff again. I've got to leave. But I had been trained by my HR lady about the terms of my departure. So it's like, okay, guys, you're going to give me outplacement. You're going to fund all of my investment funds that are, they're all going to be vested. You're going to give me a year of compensation, blah, 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 blah. So I was basically negotiating a settlement, right?
Right.
And so I called up Drexel and I said, okay, do you have an interest rate swap department? Somebody over there's got to care about this. So eventually I found the guy who had the mandate to start the interest rate swap department over there. And I went over there and I started and I became a Drexel person in 1984. And there I remained and I built it up to be quite significant. And then I went into structured finance. This whole thing was growing as part of the mortgage-related product area at Drexel. And along the way, I got married and I had 2 children. I married a guy who worked on the trading floor at Drexel. And when I was out with my second baby, it was very clear that the firm was in liquidation. It had gone through the investigation and the RICO analysis and all these things that were happening in connection with allegations about insider trading. Remember Dennis Levine, Ivan Bosky, Martin, somebody or other, and Michael R. Milken.
Right.
So when I was out having this baby, it's like I could see that the firm was in liquidation because I was far enough away from it. When I said to my boss, I said, you know me, I'm not going to raise any fuss. Just give me the package you're giving all the other people you're laying off. And you don't need to bring me back. He said, I have to bring you back because you're a utility infielder. You're somebody that's versatile during this period of time. So I said, okay, well, listen, I will come back because I don't want to leave the firm as an ingrate. You've helped me through 2 children, and I want to make sure that women behind me get the benefit of the same thing you've done for me. Mm-hmm. But I tell you, I want to start my own business, and here's my business plan. So he looked at it and he said, well, it's not competitive with Drexel. So it was a money management company. And at the end of the first quarter, we will help put you in business. So I said, well, okay, that's a pretty good deal. I'll be there. But February 13th of 1990, Drexel declared bankruptcy. And the employees who had been working under this cloud for several years were seriously pissed. They had not seen it coming. I wasn't totally surprised. So I picked up a clipboard, believe it or not. I started walking around making a home address list because there was no internet, there was no connectivity, there was no phone book at Drexel, and they were very proud of that. There was no organization chart. If you needed to know somebody, you knew them. So I thought, look, we're going to get thrown out of this place in the next few days. So we need the home address list so we can help each other get jobs. Mm-hmm. And I will keep on putting out this address list as long as I can answer my phone. Mm-hmm. So I kept doing that. But what that ended up happening is that all these people started coming to me saying, well, what are we going to do? What do you mean, what are we going to do? Well, this is bad. We've got to take action on this. And I said, well, we don't really have any rights. And so I started looking into the question of rights. And I'd worked on Wall Street long enough to know a lot of lawyers. So I started calling up lawyers and finding out, hey, there are a bunch of employees here that get turned out of this place. And they click. Everybody hung up the phone. Eventually, my neighbor, who was in admiralty law, said, we just took in all these restructuring and bankruptcy lawyers from the bankruptcy of another firm. Let me see if they'll talk to you. And I got the call back saying, they'll have lunch with you any day this week. So I thought, aha, fish online. This is good. Right.
So I just want to jump in for a second because I just want to point to something that is clear. There's a way in which the minute something goes awry, you jump into action, you jump into research mode. You just start asking questions and getting information. You don't run around saying, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. You say, okay, here's what's in front of us. What do we need to know? What's going to empower us to take the next steps? Or what are the questions we need to be asking and who can answer them? And it sounds like that has happened every step of the way, every change you've made, even though the circumstances around some of the changes you've made are different and some are more extreme than others. It's really interesting to hear how it's like you almost didn't even take a breath or skip a beat. You just got your clipboard and started getting everyone's names, or you just kept calling attorneys until you found one who would talk to you. And there is something about that perseverance, but it's not just the perseverance. It's not just the, I'm just going to keep going. I'm not going to let them get me down. It's not even it's in a way, I feel like your ego isn't even in this. There's a way in which you're just, you said it before, there's this intellectual drive within you to just get the information you need. It's almost like you're the vessel for getting the information and your ego is not in it. And I don't know if you feel that way or if that resonates with you, but it kind of sounds like there's a way in which you go after things and you just don't let your most, let's say, vulnerable self get in the way of it. Does that make sense?
It indeed makes sense. And Tammy, I'm learning a lot myself just from going over this with you. And I do attribute that to the way I grew up, that, I had to prop my mother up. My mother did a good job going out there and getting jobs, but I had to sort of prop her up and say, don't worry, Mom, God's going to take care of us. I started doing that at 3 years old. And you do that as the adult child of an alcoholic. You know how to cope. So you're right that the emotional part of me was frozen inside because it looks to me like it's a waste of time. And we don't have time to waste. We've got to use our time wisely in this circumstance. What is the critical path of what needs to happen?
Right.
And I developed, and you're right, having done this a number of times, I became really good at it. And that's what made me good in my later career as a turnaround manager.
Right.
Because many turnaround managers are coming out of accounting backgrounds, because the first thing you have to do is get control of the numbers.
Right.
But in my view, getting control of the numbers was never enough. Whereas what's really fun and fascinating to me about the turnaround work is to do what you're talking about, which is to analyze the essence of what's going on here.
Right.
What is missing? What do these people believe? What are they capable of?
Yeah.
And what's the critical path that needs to happen to get them from where they are to where this company could be? Yeah. And then what are the obstacles in the way? And how do we get around them? Who needs to be our ally to get over that?
In a way, that set of questions, while they sound simple, there's a big picture there, and then there's a lot of particles in there too that all, when you look at all of them, you're going to be able to take an entity to a whole different result if you can answer a lot of those questions.
Exactly.
And that's a big piece of what you've been able to do as a turnaround specialist, right?
And that's been what's been such a joy about it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes they're so far gone and you can't do anything because usually you get the call very late in the day because people don't face their bad circumstances. But if there are still options, if there's still time, it's an extremely rewarding thing to work on.
Yeah, I bet. Especially, I can imagine with companies where the person really felt like the company was their baby, or their heart and their soul was in it, and you're able to help them at least salvage maybe the essence of what the company was about, even if they have to operate it very differently going forward.
Exactly.
You know, so while there's that part of you that's able to maybe compartmentalize some of the emotion, you also are able to attend to it at the same time.
It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, at least in other people.
Well, most of us can, right? And I'm going to fast forward us for a moment.
Right.
Because what I find so intriguing about your life, at least to date, because I have a feeling there's more to come, is that I know that you are remarried at this point, and that your move to Grenada, Mississippi, was sort of motivated by your second marriage, and that you have immersed yourself in this community in Grenada. You have bought up a bunch of properties in the area. You've opened up, I believe, a restaurant. You've opened up a kind of more like a pub type of establishment. You've supported a whole range of daycare, childcare centers, and really have taken a region and an area and a community that has really been hit hard, and really you're in the process now of breathing life into an area that really has been, suffering in some ways. Am I right about that, or am I overstating it?
Well, I want to be careful not to claim too much credit in that I have had a very real impact in this town, and I've had an impact on its self-confidence, which is what I've been trying to do. But what I view as the goal is not really to build my own empire as much as it is to do what I try to do in every turnaround engagement I have, which is to unlock the capabilities of the people around me.
Yes. I don't see it as, that Grenada is going to be renamed or something, Deborah Hicks,
some of my friends.
Bill.
Yeah.
It's now going to be Midanekville. Mississippi.
Heaven
No,
forbid.
I get that. Maybe they'll name a building or two after you, but I don't want to reduce this to some small piece of, story of transition. But when you talk about your childhood and all the transitions and how you can tie that to your even going from, a large urban university to a smaller, let's say quainter, college, and then working your way from a college admissions role into the world of finance and banking and business. There's a way in which it all sounds like there was some very natural ways that it evolved, and yet there was an intention as you took one step and put one foot in front of the other. Things didn't just happen to you. You made things happen.
I think that's true, but there are a few precursors to it that are important. One of them is I did grow up with all that change. Another one is I grew up without, what amounts to emotional support, right? So I had a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, and I had to learn to manage that. And either I was going to turn into a puddle on the floor and not able to do anything, or, I had to kind of get a grip. And the ability to kind of get a grip and power forward no matter what was happening around me stood me in extremely good stead. But for much of that time, I was frightened and miserable because I felt like a complete misfit. I wasn't doing things the way other people did them. Right. And I just desperately wanted to be able to fit in. So I have used this analogy a number of times that I always thought that what I was trying to do was catch up with everybody else. And then I would turn around and look and I think, wait a minute. It's not only that I'm way out in front of them, it's that I'm living in a different dimension, Yeah. So I was lonely. I was lonely, but I found a few good advisors along the way, not mentors in work. I never was lucky enough to find a mentor. And I think there's a lot of luck that goes into finding that kind of relationship in a corporate situation. But I did have one guy who was just full of tough love, who guided me along as a friend during my New York adapting years and said, look, you can come here and you can cry all you want and you can be unhappy all you want. And then when you go outside in the world, you have really broad shoulders and I expect great things from you. You go out there and do what you are capable of doing. And, he was a father figure in effect because I never had one of those. And he said, I have a closet full of Duco cement. I will stick you back together when you fall apart.
Wow.
But you go out there and you do it.
Wow.
Now, later, I saw him 20 years later when I was in a very different frame of mind, when I was married to this husband and all the rest of that sort of stuff. And we had lunch together. And he admitted to me, the thing that amazed him about me was that every time he told me to do something, I just stood up and did it. That he never met anybody else who did that before.
Right. Well, and in some ways, I feel like you're not somebody who just does things because people tell you to do it. There has to be a good reason for you to do it.
Yeah, that's important. I meant to say that actually. The advice that he was giving me was good advice because, I kept saying, oh, this world of money is really scary to me. I don't know how to behave here. I feel like I'm an anthropologist on Wall Street. I'm a participant observer. I'm not really part of it. And he would say, okay, but you have gotten yourself a foothold in this arena. And instead of retreating back to nonprofits, which I kept wanting to do, he said, you kidding? The politics in nonprofits are really awful because where there's no money, there are lots and lots of politics. Yes. So if you can't deal with politics in Wall Street, you certainly can't deal with it in a nonprofit. Okay. Yeah. I bought that idea. I think that was correct. Yeah. But he said, look, what you need to do is look for open systems in the workplace. Find open systems, which was a variation on what I was talking about in terms of looking for turnarounds, where the thing was broken, so there was space to move.
Right.
So open systems. And he said, I don't know anything about Wall Street, but the truth is the systems are most likely to be open where people are making money. So go to the places where people are making the money, and there you will have opportunity.
I see.
So that was pretty good advice, because I've still never been oriented toward making money, but because I was in a cohort of people for whom making money was very important,
right,
I got my share.
Yes.
Right. I got my share, which was important.
So I want to point out one other thing before we wrap up, and that is that you're also a published author.
I am.
And so we know there's no grass growing under your feet, because you're just doing so many things. You've written one book. You've got another one that's in the works. The first one is called The Governance Revolution: What Every Board Member Needs to Know Now. And a second book coming up, The Governance Revolution in Action: What Stakeholders Say.
Both of which will have links about in our show notes. Deborah, I want to thank you so much for sharing your story. And there's so much more I know we didn't even get to today, but I appreciate your time today, and for all the other details about Deborah's work and all that is going on in Grenada, Mississippi, please take a look at the show notes, folks. And Deborah, thank you again.
It's been such a blessing for me, Tammy, because I have never thought about this. You've given me so much to think about.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Deborah Midanek. It was so interesting to speak with her and learn about her personal and professional journey. What is your key takeaway from our interview? Is there something you'll put into action that you'll benefit from for years to come? Share what resonated with you in the show notes at workfromtheinsideout.com. Look for episode 044. That's also where you'll find all the links and resources from today's podcast. If you were inspired by this episode with Deborah, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Remember, subscribing is always free. Are you enjoying the podcast? I'd love to reread your review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to find my page at tammygoulerloeb.com/Apple. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. Let me know how it's going for you. And who knows, maybe you'll be my next interview on this podcast. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.